Good morning, everyone. Listen, on behalf of my fellow colleagues here on the stage, Sheri, Garen, Fatima, and Brian, very happy to host this discussion. As you can see from the venue, it should be an interactive exercise, and it's actually a warm exercise, so you don't need to keep your coats too far away. I think we all agree that this topic of fulfillment, joy, satisfaction, should apply not only to our personal lives, because we look for that and we find it, but in all the areas, workplaces, communities that we are part of. And the workplace is a key part of that. So it's a fundamental, in our belief, human drive. So what's keeping us from greatness? Because if you look at everything, the data and all the anxiety, the stress, the technology seems to not be creating that joyful workplace, that joyful culture. It's so important, and even in the broader Davos agenda, the importance of having those self-sustaining, healthy communities, mentally and culturally. So I think we can all agree that what we'd like to do is to multiply that discussion. And it's already multiplied in the last few years. We were talking about that earlier. It's becoming more mainstream, but we can be ambassadors and navigators for the rest of the world, and maybe ambassadors of more than that, just the initiatives. If you look at the facts, I mean, we are the most connected generation ever, and it's going to only get more with 5G and 6G and the like. Why is it then that the level of loneliness and isolation, if statistically across millennials, even Generation Z, 60–70% of them are saying, I feel loneliness once a week. Diversity and inclusion. A lot of diversity is hidden, whether it's mental illness, whether it's mental health, income, thought processes. How do we create workplace cultures which are much more inclusive, open to bringing the best of each other and the like? So these are some of the topics we want to talk about. I think the why, what, and the how of making this happen in a bigger way. And if we think in our workplaces, there are people that are striving and thriving. There are people that are just struggling and trying to get by, and there are those that are suffering. So we need to look at the whole community, and I think that's a part of what we're trying to do here. So listen, it's going to be interactive. What's going to happen is I think I'm going to introduce my fellow colleagues a little bit more and then hear from them and then open it up. Very simple and the like. Thank you. So we have Sheri Bronstein, who's the Chief Human Resources Officer of Bank of America, Garen Staglin, founder of One Mind USA and a longtime philanthropist and exponent of a lot of the mental illness topics. Fatima, one of the WEF global shapers and headed the global mental health initiative for the WEF, and is also in the tech world working at Microsoft, so balancing some of these exact same topics. Brian Tippens, Vice President at HB Enterprises, and has a number of corporate functions, but most recently also heading up the employee experience. So welcome, and look forward to the discussion.
Great, thanks.
Let's maybe start off with Sheri. I mean, obviously Bank of America, huge company, and you've been at the leading edge of a lot of these topics. How are you looking at this area of opportunity?
Yeah. So first, thank you for having us. And Garen and I were talking about on the way over here. It's great to see how many sessions there are this year on this topic, because I think, we really are starting to see this topic emerging as, a major topic for corporations, for societies. And that's really where it starts. And so I think that's terrific. And thank you for hosting us on this. So I think first of all, the topic you just categorize sort of, we have people in our workplace in these three different buckets, and that's absolutely what we see. But when you think about, we have people in our workforce that are playing different roles, right? So we have incoming generations. You just shared some of the statistics. We know that Gen Z, we know there's a lot of anxiety. We know there's a lot of depression. 60% of college freshmen have sometime in their first year debilitating anxiety or depression. That's our workforce. So this isn't 1% or 2%. We've got to help that population enter the workplace. I think that's one. The second thing is we've got to help all of our teammates, and anybody can be on any given day in one of those three categories. But then third, a big part of our population are parents. And what we're finding is we have to help our parents thrive too, because if you come to work and you're worried about what's going on with your child and you don't feel like you have the resources or the outlet or the environment of caring that you can talk about that, you are not going to get anything done that day. You can't serve your customers, you can't be a good leader, you can't be a good teammate. And so, the reality is those of us that work spend most of our, waking hours at work. And so the workplace, I think, is becoming the place that people look for that support. And it really comes down to culture, and it starts with the CEO, and in our case with Brian, who has said, look, at the end of the day, our biggest asset, and really our only asset, are our people. And we've got to have people that are healthy, and that means across all those spectrums. And again, on any given day, people are playing those different roles, so we've got to support managers, parents, teammates, and our incoming generation.
Well, Sheri, you put your finger on something very important, which is the importance of culture as an overriding influencer of strategy and making it a virtuous circle. I want to come back to you later on how you scale up that ambition and that intention. But maybe turn over a bit to Garen. I mean, you work with a lot of companies, enterprises, and over the many years and such credibility. How do you see this coming to life and full potential?
Our early work, and thanks for hosting this session, Alex. We started after my son had a psychotic break from schizophrenia in 1990 to run towards the problem to try to see if we could figure out how to prevent that from happening for other kids. So understanding the science of this, some early detection capabilities which are now to the point of we have a 70% accuracy of telling whether a kid is at risk for psychosis. But we're continuing to pursue science which will lead ultimately to more evidence-based treatments for people with these illnesses. But to really make an impact on this word that we use a lot is stigma, we kind of thought about it in a different way. It really, as it manifested for people, it's really discrimination. And where is that felt most prominently is in the workplace. And if people can't bring their whole self to work, and if they feel that the admission of their illness or condition gives them some kind of black mark for promotion, for inclusion in activities, then this is not going to be a place where they can thrive and do their best work. So we began a whole process of understanding what are the economics of not dealing with this problem. We hired Tufts University to do a study for us, and we can share the data. It's on our website, onemindAtWork.org. And for every dollar you invest in changing the culture, changing your benefit plans, paying attention to this as a topic, and the tone at the top is the important one, having the CEO sign our charter of the 8 things you're going to do to help make your workplace one where people thrive, you'll get $3 to $5 back. So the ROI on this, in terms of short-term shareholder improvement, probably the highest impact area that a business can do. So everybody knows it's the right thing to do. We help people get started, and now we can prove to you it's good for business.
I want to come back to you later also about how leaders and companies can further accentuate the commitment to inclusion.
Yes.
Because diversity is often seen, in fact, but often not seen.
Yeah.
And those statistics don't always come to mind when you think about diversity, whether it's gender, et cetera. But inclusion, the sense of belonging, is very important. I know, Fatima, that's something that you feel very strongly about, and you've been representing a number of groups, especially the youth of the world. Not all the. What are your thoughts on this this general topic?
So inclusion is very important, as you said. So I'm in charge of globally coordinating projects on diversity and inclusion in the community. So we work, across gender equity, disability inclusion, and mental health is one of those. And as you said, it's mental health it can be invisible, or mental health issues. So so I think that's the key to it. It's that you can look at a person and they can, you look at me, I look like a cheerful, positive, successful person. So I dealt with depression for several years and it went unnoticed. So I think that's the risk, is that at the workplace, probably the employers don't know that their employees are struggling to start with. And then they're like, oh, we have less productivity, you just cannot explain certain things. So I think that's the complexity of it. And that's why making it part of the culture, which is not something easy to do and which is a long-term process, is really important. And I join Garen's points on discrimination. If at the highest level of the company, you don't have that stewardship from the CEO, and I mean by that them coming up and talking about their personal stories, not saying, oh, it's okay to talk about mental health. you need, for example, my kid has schizophrenia, and this is what I deal with every week. And yesterday I was crying because my kid could not sleep, something like that, something real. And it's not easy for people to share this, but I think most of the time we talk about mental health as this isolated topic, but we need to take an integrated approach because every one of us has a story, no matter who we are. I challenge anyone to tell me, I don't have a mental health story.
I mean, what I like about what you say, Fatima, is also there's programs and there's purpose, but there's also real authenticity and passion around being a part of the solution, because it is a cultural solution, mental health being one aspect of it among others, but they do interrelate. And we've been talking a lot about some mega topics, right? Diversity, inclusion, joy, purpose, and trying to make it more tangible, for example, in a corporate environment where you're on this journey. Maybe, Brian, you can talk a bit from your perspective.
Yeah, and I resonate with all the comments of my fellow panelists. I'm very passionate about the inclusion topic. I spent a number of years looking after inclusion and diversity for Hewlett Packard Enterprise. And I think it's important to note that there's lots of sort of situation-specific details we should be thinking about as corporations. So there's on one side this call to action that you mentioned, the kind of pervasive anxiety and stress all around the world. Many of you may have seen the Gallup survey in 2019, their emotional wellness survey, where they surveyed 151,000 people around the world in 140 countries and found that we had record levels of stress and anxiety in countries like the US and others, and especially among the younger generations. But we also have to think about our enterprise. And so I'll tell a story about my company just to kind of illustrate this. So you've heard of HP, I hope. So HP was founded in 1939, really the founding of the Silicon Valley, and for 75 years was a leader in technology. We, in 2015, decided it was time to make a major separation for a number of reasons. We'd grown too large and we're trying to serve everyone in every way in our space. And so the company I work for now, Hewlett Packard Enterprise, was born out of that separation in 2015. It was a very significant, massive move, and we followed that up with a few more divestitures and spin-offs in a way that made our employees kind of scared and heightened stress, heightened anxiety. We went through a series of layoffs that made people a little bit nervous, and there was even a little bit of sort of survivor's remorse for those who were left behind. And so I say that to say that in addition to the pervasive anxiety that we just know exists, you sometimes have these kind of corporation-specific dynamics that you have to think about. And as now the dust has settled on all those separations, we're just now at the point where we're kind of being very forward-thinking about how we approach what we're thinking about. Fatima talked about an integrated approach. We think about mental wellness and well-being, but we think about more behavioral wellness, behavioral well-being, all those elements about mental health, but it might be addiction, it might be issues of parenting, it could be stress, it may be I want to stop smoking. It's thinking about very deliberately how we approach this in a really, really integrated way.
Maybe I might add another perspective too. I lead a professional services company. It's global. It spans multiple geographies and cultures. We're mostly millennials and Generation X, and the other 5% are the baby boomers who have created all the problems that Web is trying to solve here. And I'm one of those. But a couple of things. One, when we work with clients who have this same issue, so I will say that we're not alone here. All the corporations are looking at wrestling with this. They see what we call the joy gap, linking their strategies to their people and the war on talent. And we did some research actually around the world. And if you look at asking employees of all demographic cohorts, old to young, new to old, small companies, big companies, all geographies, there is a joy gap. Like 90% of the people say they want to go to work and feel, wow, I love it, I can't wait to go to work. But only 40%, less than 40% do. So it's a 50% gap. A lot of potential. That's a little bit of the problem. Now, why is that? I guess is a question I want to explore. I mean, each company and country will have their own reason. Is it just a bad culture? Is it bad leadership? Is it lack of programs? Is it generational? I mean, our data showed it wasn't generational. It's endemic. So I think that's a key commitment. And I was really struck by some of the implicit narrative about being personal and really real. You have personal stories of why you are there.
Right.
I mean, I was an immigrant in Asia myself, and I've been an outsider my whole life, but that allows you individually to sort of feel, how do you look at roles and rapport? And if you are lucky enough to be leading organizations and championing causes and programs and global initiatives, you have to have that sort of, it has to come through. Maybe go back a little bit here, and maybe Sheri, you have a big company and it's as diverse as any in the world. Yeah. And talent is a key thing. How do you translate that into scaling it up for success?
Well, So I think kind of going to your macro point about culture and joy, and I think, again, it's a very individual thing, but what you need is for your team, your employees, and we have over 200,000, to be proud of what they do. And I think that pride doesn't always translate to joy, but there's a very high correlation. And so a lot of what we've been doing coming out of the financial crisis, where honestly, a lot of us were not proud of, the industry, and our pride was probably at the lowest in our company's history. And what Brian's done, and we've tried to all do, is say, we are going to be a purposeful company. We're going to deliver for our clients and our communities. We're going to deliver for our team. We're going to deliver for our shareholders, and we're going to help try to solve some of the world's biggest problems by using our capital and our intellectual capabilities and our platform. So what I've seen happen with that is our employee SAT scores have gone up, our customer SAT scores have gone up, our index, we have a couple questions that really predict, are employees likely to stay here? Our turnover's at record lows, even in a very low unemployment, area in most Western countries. So I think there's just a real connection, and it doesn't mean that every day people love the actual work they may be doing, that would be panacea, but we're trying to make the work as exciting as we can every day. But even if 2 hours of your day is spent on something where you're you just got to get it done, if then you say yeah, but I'm proud of this company, I'm proud of the things we do. And I'll just share an anecdote. We went to $20 an hour in the US, which is, we're one of the leaders in raising our minimum wage. The notes that Brian and I got from our teammates that had nothing to do with the people that were getting the $20 an hour, investment bankers, wealth managers, clients, customers, saying, I'm proud of you for doing this, because you want your people to have a good standard of life. And I think you've got to keep thinking about, what is it that's going to make, we do millions of volunteer hours. That gives people pride. So again, everybody's different, but kind of allowing that ecosystem to grow and exist, and make sure there's different things for different people. And then investing in managers, the role of the manager, as you know, is key. And that's where we spend a lot of our time on this specific topic, has been around two things: getting the dialogue going and lifting the stigma and making it okay for us to all tell our personal stories and to talk about this and to get resources, and the role of the manager in that journey.
What's exciting about what you say also, as I listen to you, is there should be no trade-off between caring for your community, broadly speaking, right, suppliers and your teammates, and corporate purposes. And I've worked with Brian on a number of other areas here. I serve on the IBC here at the WEF, and he uses the term that you use, teammates. Yeah. And if you treat your workers, everyone as teammates, you have a need for acknowledgement, role clarity, harmony, fairness, justice, winning in the market, and things happen, and that's when you unleash the sort of the joy. So that's great to hear. Now, Garen, you see a lot of other companies in this journey and their level of commitment and effectiveness. What are your observations on that?
Yeah, well, we have the good fortune of having a very strong partnership with Bank of America, and I think one of the great things that we try to promote in the One Minded Work Global Coalition is the sharing of best practices and ideas, and that's what a network is really about, and matching things up. But as I give you, this idea of where's this block in joy. So I think when you think about how people come to work, you want to feel fulfilled. You want to think you're doing good work and the company has good purpose, but you want to bring your whole self to work. So what does that mean? So we really focused to begin with on racial diversity. We moved to gender diversity. We moved to sexual preference diversity, and now we're on neurodiversity. And if you have Asperger's and you feel like you can't do your best work, you're not going to be in a position where your incredible analytical and mathematical skills are going to be able to come forward. So you can't thrive in that environment. I think joy and thrive are the same word, and as I think is manifested in people. So companies have to create that environment where they recognize the neurodiversity within their workforce, celebrate it, give people with special talents the opportunity to employ those special talents. SAP has a program specifically around autism. We have one of our member companies called Auticon. They do outsource software services, they only hire people with autism. And their levels of productivity, you probably at Kearney measure engagement or productivity and utilization, incredibly high. But those people can't work in an open environment. They can't be in the middle of the room doing their programming. They need to have a special skilled kind of place. So I think it's sensitivity, one size doesn't fit all, but just opening that gap and thriving is allow people to feel fulfilled, and doing their best work means all their teammates worship their skills in an equivalent way. Let me have just one other point that I think is important as we think about this concept of neurodiversity. I want to just add another dimension, which is about brain health. We use that word now instead of mental illness. We've long moved off of that to brain health, because brain health and brain fitness, I think, is what we're all striving for. And if we think of it as a spectrum, we're all on some point of that spectrum, and we're not on the same point every day. When you've just come from a hike in the open air, you're probably at the high end of that. When you've just come off, a 24-hour plane ride with 2 delays and rubber chicken, you're probably at the low end of that spectrum. We're all going to be there Saturday morning or Sunday, right? So that whole spectrum of brain health, I think, helps us look at people with different conditions in ways that we don't want to feel discriminatory to them. Oh, Cheryl's not having the best day today, but tomorrow it's going to be okay. So I think stigma, discrimination can be reduced if we think of this as brain health and concentrate on brain health and brain fitness instead of mental illness and the downside of this whole posture.
Well, Garen, you've accentuated that each brain is different.
Yes.
And even during the day, the same brain can be different.
Yeah,
each individual is different.
Right.
They need to be, I love the way you describe it, safe, seen,
right,
supported,
yeah,
and ultimately fulfilled, or whatever the word might be.
Yeah.
That's a noble sort of joy chain, or whatever you want to call it. But there's so much barriers to that, right? Moving to the right end of that. And I think you mentioned, Fatima, the issues of the ranges of diversity and inclusion. Maybe you can talk more about what are some barriers that will get us to greatness if we want to move to the joy part of it, the joy advantage, not the joy gap, and the sense of who we are.
And I think we need to acknowledge that it's difficult to change a culture and get to this joyful culture that we're talking about. Along the same lines of what Garen said, the example of employees with Asperger, I think we need to address the elephants in the room, that there is a cost to inclusion and that there is a cost to implementing what we're talking about here. If you want to care about that person, they have specific needs, you have to think about it from their perspective and adapt. And what happens if, as a leader, you have to make a choice between making your sales target or being kind to that person who needs? So that's where real culture, we see it. Like, if you really care, you make the right decision, which is going to serve you in the long term, but maybe in the short term, it might not help you. You know what I mean?
Yep. Well, I think you're pointing out also there's a little bit of the individual speaking up and saying, this is who I am, I want to bring my best self, can you help me? There's also a fear of doing that.
Of course.
But the surrounding people that are leading the culture, trying to generate the right culture, need to make it
when you
possible.
Make it safe, you create a safe. That's a leader's role, I believe. You make it safe for people.
And I think probably a lot of leaders will take for granted, what they do, what the kind of culture of belonging that makes sense. And as you look at the crafting this and learning from everyone, what are your thoughts?
I would piggyback on and really amplify Fatima's comments and Garrett's as well, that I always feel like there's, you said, no one size fits all, but also that inclusion and diversity does not happen organically in our enterprises. Especially, I come from the tech sector. It's in the Silicon Valley, and it's an industry that is not representative of the communities where we do business. In the tech sector, it's very popular in most companies, and you can think of the big names in the tech sector today. For your African American population to be maybe 1 or 2% of total workforce, Hispanic maybe 3 or 4, women a third, but those numbers go down when we talk about women in leadership. And so understanding there's no one size that fits all, you have to understand as an enterprise what that makeup is and what individual barriers might be to bringing one's whole self to work, right? How do I feel welcome? Is there some element of imposter syndrome? Can I truly bring my whole self to work? And unless you can get past that, you can never really bridge that gap.
No, but I mean, you have a very global company,
Sure.
and obviously there are different countries with different cultures. How do you mesh that into the global framework and make sure that you treat all the sub-aspects
Sure.
of your groups and teammates?
Yeah, I think it's understanding there is no peanut butter spread methodology to this. You have to understand those local nuances. Sheri mentioned your survey results. You know, most of our enterprises have some variation of a voice of the workforce survey, asking how people feel, trying to kind of gauge sentiment. And that's great to look at those top level scores, but I'm sure you agree it's also important to drill down.
Right. Yeah.
Do I have similarities in responses by gender, by ethnicity, by persons with disabilities, or by
Absolutely.
localities, and just taking a very scientific, data-driven approach to understanding those local nuances and then addressing them accordingly.
I mean, I think so far in the discussion we've touched on a little bit of the why and the what and the how. We've gotten a little bit of a teaser on all those areas, and I think there's a great deal of momentum and confidence that we're on the right track, and obviously pace is the real thing. How do we get more people to believe? I want to open up in a second to the audience because I know there's a lot of passion. It's a passionate, concerned community that we want to have a dialogue on, but I wanted to maybe provoke the panelists to build, how do we build more awareness? Because we all have unconscious biases from whatever I have, from whatever vantage point that you have. And a part of a lot of what I've seen in corporate cultures is to try to at least raise the water level of awareness so that we don't make the most stupid mistakes. Maybe Sheri and others have looked at this and you've seen other programs. How do we train people to be open-minded to even this concept here overall?
So I'd maybe just throw out a couple things, and I think you gotta talk the talk and walk the walk, and so it does start with your CEO and your leadership team and your board saying this is important and being willing to talk about it, and Garen came and talked to our senior leaders, and people stood up and told their story, and that was, for some of them, it was the first time that they may have felt comfortable telling their story about what was going on as either a manager or an individual or as a parent. So I think that's one. But you also, I mentioned the role of the manager in a company. We have about 20,000 managers. And at the end of the day, those are the people that we've got to make sure really are there, that understand, that are looking for signs, that are engaging in what is going on. Because again, they spend 10, 12 hours a day with people, on a good day 8. But, it is, it's an industry where people work hard. And they're either the manager or their peers, which is also another important place. But it's been interesting. So we've been doing resiliency, emotional wellness training. We have a very specific aspect around brain health within it, with another partner, and we're going through all of our managers. And what's been interesting is while we've been trying to give managers toolkits, the biggest feedback that came back from managers is thank you investing in me as a person, not just as a leader, but I learned something, again, as a parent, as a manager, as an individual. So I think we can't forget that, every time we invest, again, that brings loyalty and that people really appreciate it. And then the other thing is, we've built systems. We have a life event services team, and they're there, what we call in the moments that matter. We actually have about 80 individuals on that team, and they handle issues around domestic violence, suicides, survivor support, LGBT, transgender transition, military support, and that was a small team a few years ago. And every time we see a need, we build onto those capabilities. And when someone's had to go through what's usually a very difficult experience, having the company there to support them through it, and having it's sort of a case management model, we bring in experts as we need them. The kinds of notes that we get, I'm never going to leave the company. Thank you. Now I can go back to serving my clients and customers. So it really is about embracing our talent and making sure we're there for them.
I think that loyalty factor, that authentic care is very important, whether it's work-life balance. And in my sector, that's a big issue. I mean, you want us to do these great things, our clients come first, but we're working crazy. How do we get that right balance? And I haven't figured it out, to be quite honest. Need all kinds of help. But the other thing that I think you mentioned, which is really key, is that the the best companies actually understand that people are the key to success. The war for talent, keeping them, motivating them,
Yep.
recognizing them. You use bringing the best version of themselves.
Right.
And that's the difference between first quartile performance, broadly defined, versus that is that if you take your people for granted, don't see them, don't give them a sense of safety yet and security and support, it doesn't work. How would you rate where you think you are on the journey at HP? Because you said you're maybe not at the leading edge, but very aggressively and agilely going forward here.
Yeah, I would first piggyback on the
Yep.
comment Sheri made about managers and the importance of leader training, because whether it's 20,000 leaders or we're more like 5,000 leaders, you frequently say that people join a company to join the company, but they leave because of their manager. Yeah. So you can't really overestimate the importance of making sure with 20,000 leaders, you've got some good, you've got some great, you probably have some not so good that require some intervention. So that's extremely important. And also you talked about some of the mechanisms. We also use the term moments that matter. I think you can also not have too many vehicles for people to have their voices heard. One fairly new one that we've rolled out following the model of Intel, who really paved the way in this, is what we call our open line. It's another mechanism, whether it's online or over the phone, to make those complaints that are specific to something that happened to you. If there's some barrier to joy, whether it was a bad interaction with the leader or a coworker. So just to say, you can't have too many mechanisms to be able to speak up and be heard. So from a journey standpoint, we really just started our program in 18. We did our own survey around the globe and listened to our employees in kind of work group sessions to hear how they were feeling. And in every geography, we heard the word stress and anxiety and long working hours. And so we built a program which we call For Real Life, Support for Real Life, Tools for Real Life. And it's very similar to the Bank of America model, but it's around first raising awareness with campaigns and posters and campuses, so people know that it's okay to raise concerns, it's okay to feel stress, it's okay to reach out and need more assistance. It's about then creating this environment where people feel safe to raise those concerns, and then last, providing those tools, whether it's a traditional EAP, employee assistance programs, which all of our corporations have, but really going beyond that to having counselors on campuses or that open line like I talked about. And so we're early in that journey, but we're already seeing after a pilot a significant increase in people using those EAP resources. And on one level you say, well, that's bad. 100% more people are complaining. But it's good in that these are people who are raising issues that would not have raised those issues were it not for that campaign. So early in our journey, but pleased with the progress that we're making so far. It's largely around raising that awareness and creating the environment where people can have those discussions.
Yep. I mean, in my own company, we try to apply the same best practices that you're alluding to. Like, start with a mindset, try to generate the right behaviors that lead to habits, that lead to culture. And that should be a good culture at the end. What we've tried to do, again, is start with the values that we owe each other as a firm. It links to purpose, but it's probably not purpose itself, but we have 5 values. Generosity and solidarity, which are the key linchpins of teamwork. That's a key theme. The other 3 are passion, curiosity, and boldness. Obviously, we're in a service business. It's consulting, it's bespoke solutions. So you need that to be at your individual best. But if you have those 5 values, and they'll differ by company and situation and sector, that leads to what we call it a DIAL program: diversity, inclusion, apprenticeship, and leadership. They link together. Dial it up. Very simple to remember, and that's one of the values. And I tell you, all 3,500 employees we have use that same terminology. So it's a very easy way for us because we're smaller and we're global and we know each other a little more, but it's more difficult, I think, in a big company that has much more complexity, maybe more matrices and silos and layers and metrics and things. That all gets in the way of the human part of it. And I think what I like about this Davos and this session in particular is the focus on the humanity of our problems. So I thank you for that. Maybe if there are people that have some questions, I gave you a little bit of heads up a few minutes ago, but I'd love to get this going here. Yes, please.
So
We'll give you a...
Hi, my name is Anat. I'm an serial entrepreneur, high-tech innovation, so it's a totally different world. My son works in a corporate, he's a millennial, and he comes to me and he tells, it's not a corporate, it's not a huge corporate. Okay, so he comes, they want to be agile, they must be agile because of the industry they're in, it's like web developers. And then he says, they change my job all the time, they move me from place to place. My feeling is, Benny, they have to do it, because it's all about, they have clients. So how do you address this? And he says, I feel disrespected.
I mean, it's always hard to respond, you know, on a specific situation, but I do think that great companies and managers, you know, and it's always, you know, a question of, you know, is it a thing around the company culture or is it a specific manager, and trying to get to the bottom of that. But I think that, again, that open dialogue of why it's happening, you know, we spend a lot of time talking about, you know, just thinking about what you're asking, why, you know, so maybe the company's, you know, acquiring a bunch of companies or, you know, and there really is a real business need, but there has to be an open dialogue about why it's happening and does it work for the person. Because I think what we understand now, if you go and talk to people who do like campus recruiting, so they're out on colleges hiring young people, what they'll say is it is 95% an employee-driven model. It didn't used to be that way. People choose your company just like customers choose your company. So, you know, my advice to sort of young people is always try to engage with your manager, try to get to a better solution, make sure it works for you. But if you conclude that that's the company's culture and you're not happy there, then you may have to make a different choice. And unfortunately, I think that is a lot of what we see. And it's why we're so focused on the role of the manager, because we do know people leave when they're not happy with their manager.
But from my perspective, coming from technology, this is what the company needs to do in order to survive. For me, it's totally legitimate what they're doing. They need to be agile.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's a gap in expectations when he started. There should have been more transparency about this is who we are, this is how we work, and you should expect that. You know, you're not going to be on that same desk doing the same job 6 months from now. There's no, in fact, if anything, I'd say it's a demonstration of respect and capability that we can pick you up and put you on another project that's got a high priority. But if they're not celebrating the success that he is having and the individual job that he's doing before he moves to the next one, then it does probably feel for him a little bit like a factory that's just plugging him in whatever crap job they have for me next, right? Which is not what you want to say, right?
Yeah, to piggyback on that and just say that you're not alone, that's totally consistent with what the data tells us. That survey I talked to you about, the Gallup survey, and it's quite easy to get the details if you want to look into it, emotional wellness survey, 151,000 people took it in 140 countries and across the globe. Consistently, some the lowest scores were among the Gen Y, Gen Z in terms of having fear and having anxiety. And I don't know what the reasons are. It's probably different reasons around the globe. But they're the most likely to have that level of anxiety, but also most likely to speak up when they don't feel like they're happy. Those of us who have been in the workforce for a while, we know we've got to toe the party line and do the work and get things done. The millennials and the Gen Ys are more likely to say, I've been here 2 months and I haven't been promoted. What's going on? Or you know, I'm not appreciating this challenge that I've been given. Or they're out to get me, Mom. And I don't know the answer, but you're not alone. I think we have to think about the fact that in most of our enterprises, for the first time, we're dealing with 5 generations in the workforce, and we can't speak to all 5 in the exact same way. It means we have to train our managers in a different way. We have to set expectations coming in the door a different way. We have to think about it very holistically.
I mean, there was just
if I may here, because I represent kind of that generation.
But I wasn't talking about you when I talked about the complaining.
Don't worry, I don't take it personally. But I think the solution is kind of twofold. The workplace needs to be flexible, and the leadership, I mean, as you said, this is the reality, and it's probably not just in this company, but pretty much everywhere, right? So it's the reality, we have to accept it. But you can have that, but still be flexible in allowing people to do the things that, you know, make them joyful. Or, so maybe let me give an example. I think maybe your son needs to, or you know, all those young employees needs to know how to set boundaries and say, I might stay up working until 2 in the morning, and that would be okay. But then this thing is important for me. Like I need to go to this sports events in the middle of the week and not work or something like that. And I really love this quote from Marissa Mayer of Yahoo. She says, I believe burnout is about resentment. She says, I have a theory about burnout, and I think it's about resentment. So if you think you're going to do something and it's going to lead you to resent that, I'm like, damn it, I knew I shouldn't have done that, but I did it. You know, I missed a family event, or I missed something that's important to me, but then you do it. You need to catch those moments and be like, no, this is important for me, I'm gonna do it, but then I'm gonna compensate for it by working on a weekend or something like that. So it's okay to kind of work a lot or work hard, but know the things that are important to you and know where to stop. Because I think when we push our boundaries, that's what leads to situations
There
like
clearly
this.
is an individual accountability. You have to take,
Yes.
run your own race,
Yeah.
define your own objective, define your own purpose, but I think there's obviously a corporate obligation to be receptive and responsive. One of the things that I found helpful in seeing the companies around the world that I work with in my own company is regular, committed engagement surveys. Ask the simple questions. It doesn't have to be a long survey. We ask 15, 19 questions every 6 months. We track progress, engagement, belonging, inclusion, respect, and you look at it, and obviously we have, there's differences in demographics. Women feel more anxious and stressful. So you look at great insights for the managers to be able to take action. We heard you, we understand there's an issue. Anyway, just to complete the other perspective.
I would just say, just on the incoming, generation too, there's been a lot of media and studies done recently that just says, look, workplace flexibility and the ability to talk about brain health, emotional wellness is critical to my choice of where I'm going to work. So there's just a business imperative that this is the talent base, and we've got to find a way generationally to kind of meet in the middle. But this is the workforce that's coming in, and we've got to find ways as corporations to adapt to it.
And how do you create this thing that people can talk about it, about the mental health?
Yep.
How do you-
Like I said, we just.
Pass the mic.
sorry.
Yeah, we got
Do you have another question
I-
after that? But yeah.
Sure. Amy Richards from Mercer at Marsh & McLennan. As we look across industries, we've all played the same movie multiple times about making the business case for investing in different types of inclusion and diversity. And Garen, you were running through as we've gone on the journey from gender diversity through sexual orientation diversity and so on.
Yeah.
I'd be really interested to hear the views of the panel, and particularly perhaps those of you in larger organisations, about where you think we are on that journey vis-a-vis mental health and well-being. You talked about having an 80-person Moments That Matter team, which is a huge team. I'd be really interested to see, are you still finding you're having to make the business case? How successful are we in making that? How far down the road are we? I'd love to hear more about that.
I don't think, I think we're well down the road on the business case and commitment from the top, but I think we're in inning 2 or 3 on solutions and scaling. I think to Alex's point about, scaling this in different countries, different generations, different types of jobs. But I would say the pace of change is about as fast as anything I can remember in my career. So, 3 years ago, this was sort of, okay, we have some benefits over here when there's a problem, to the CEOs talking about this, and we have really strong external partnerships, and we're participating in a really rich dialogue here and trying to share best practices. It's gone from here to here, but we're like I said, maybe inning 3. I think there's a lot more to do.
It's a journey.
It's a journey.
And I think it's just one point I would add, and I know we're going to get more comments. Don't think of this as just a large company effort. This is for everybody. Small companies need to be involved in this. You don't need sophisticated programs. You don't have to buy a supercomputer to get in this game. It is about a dialogue. It's about setting expectations. And in your company's, your son's company, if the CEO, the first time they came in, did a town hall in the kitchen and said, hey guys, we're 25 of us here together. I know all of us have probably something going on with brain health or mental health. Let's bring it out, let's talk about it, and we'll do something about it. That's how hard it is, which means it's not hard at all. And 25 people can do it, and 200,000 companies can do
I want
it.
to get a couple questions before we
Great.
wrap.
Thanks so much for the conversation. Really insightful. Florian Hoffman from the Do School. We work on a more purposeful economy. And I'm wondering whether you guys could build a bit more on, I really love the conversation about awareness and the programming and on culture and the leadership and the manager role, but how it translates then into day-to-day work. So I'm asking that because we've worked a lot on cultural sort of progress. And what I see a lot with leaders especially is that they're trying very hard to change culture, but then the day-to-day routine actually prevents people from seeing change or progress. And some of our partners came back to us and said, well, maybe the problem is that we're allocating resources wrongly or badly in today's world. So is there a way that you guys are thinking about, is the matrix our future, or how do we actually best make our people work in a way that, I like this idea of having a joyful engagement that feels safe and that actually sort of caters to the idea of inclusion. Thank you so much.
I think it's about practice. So, you have awareness is about practice. You have to start with, let's say, emotional literacy, so people realizing and having a language for this. But then you have to keep practicing it on a regular basis. Not just, this is one training you take and then you forget about it. Recently at Microsoft, we started this initiative called the Values Conversation, so along with the values that you talked about. So these are the values of our company, and it embeds this idea of empathy and importance of mental health and opening up and so on. So it's, my manager's manager, all his team, so that's about, 50 people. And we got on a call for 3 hours, and there was the training part of it. And then we would break out into smaller groups of 4, and we would have, it's guided, you have some questions and so on. And we get to have those intimate conversations in groups of 4 that you wouldn't normally have in larger groups. And I felt like, oh, wow, we're a tech company and we're talking about empathy and So it's creating those smaller work groups, you mentioned that word earlier, those smaller groups where people get to practice, and you do this regularly. Every 2 months, every 4 months, I'm pretty sure after some time it's going to kick in.
And I say a big part of that practice is really making it real for our employees at the bottom levels of the organization. It's one thing to have a series of artifacts on a wall. You've got your 5, we've got our 4, we've all got our corporate objectives and values, and every corporation does in some level. I think the corporations who don't get this right stop there, and it's just words. It's those who do it well, break that down to what are the behaviors and attributes to really bring that to life, and not just use words, but use stories. Where's an example of an employee of ours who put the customer at the center of everything they do, a video vignette or a story, so you really can make it actionable on a day-to-day basis, and then measure it as part of an employee's goals at the end of the year. Here's what they did, and here's how they did it, that they align with the goals and the values of the company in achieving their business objectives.
Good examples. One last question here from the audience. Yeah.
Hi guys, I'm Sarah Siegel, and I run a group called Affect Mental Health around bridging the divide in mental health. I also run peer groups for executives in San Francisco, so we have executives from a lot of the largest companies, and we talk about this in the context of those groups. My question is, if we peel back the curtain just a little bit and look at what's happening behind, a lot of you on the stage represent large employers who are paying for 50% of the healthcare benefits in the US. And I'm curious, especially for Sheri or anyone else who's interacted directly with their insurance companies, if there are things that, because of the size of your company, because of how much Cigna or Aetna or whoever is competing for your business, you've been able to successfully ask for, particularly when it comes to the younger generations, the anxiety that we're seeing, and how you might be able to give an example of using that kind of leverage so that other folks can follow.
So I would say a couple things. We have multiple insurers and we're self-insured. So we've put this, and Garen's actually helped us with a healthcare audit, and we found some things we weren't so happy with. And we because we are self-insured, we have a fair amount of control about what we cover and what we don't cover. So we do use our leverage to make sure our employees and their families are getting what they need. But again, I think on this one, we have also asked them to help in the ecosystem. So we've said to each of our insurers, part of what's important for us is that there's just more counselors available, not just for Bank of America, but in the ecosystem. So what are you doing in the healthcare system to create more capacity? And we're holding them accountable for helping to create a better ecosystem. But then the second thing is, we're also partnering. There's obviously the treatment part where we're looking to providers and insurers, but again, the education and the research, we look to Garen, and the training, we look to Ariana Huffington at Thrive. So it's not just the sort of healthcare system. That's a huge important piece, and it's very broken and needs a lot of work. But we're really trying to look at the broader, how do we use different partners in different ways to help us on this journey?
Because it seems like one of the challenges is how can you make the case, particularly at the higher levels of the organization, when it comes to the bottom line relative to sort of getting the right kind of insurance. So I was just curious if there's any specific things, maybe through your work with Garen, that you pushed them for, that you really wanted.
Well, one of the key issues generally is that is coverage duration. Many plans will say at the end of 6 months you've completed a term of treatment, and therefore we're no longer going to cover it. That's not the way it works with brain health, right? These are lifetime conditions, and 6 months, you may have gotten better, but you'll get worse if you can't continue the treatment. So just duration of coverage is one of the places you can address right away.
Thank you. I think, I've been very inspired by this two-way, thank you for that. Very inspired by the discussion. I think the one theme that I took away is that this topic, this ambition, this mission of bridging people, joy, culture together has gone from the mainstream, and now we're getting some momentum, and it's becoming a real mission. So we're all part of that, and we can catalyze that, and I'm hoping and expecting this time next year we'll have even more success stories to share with a broader group of people. Before we end, I wanted to just ask the panelists, in the last year, this is like what do you call it? The lightning round. That's what I was looking for. Thank you, Brian.
You're welcome.
Just a great joyful moment from you in the last year, just to close this off before we.
That's a tough question. I haven't thought about anything like that. 28th wedding anniversary.
There you go. Okay. Fatima?
Seeing mental health becoming a priority in the Global Shapers community, and that started with one discussion, which became a project and changing the culture.
Yeah.
I live a life of joy and optimism, but the two things that give it to me the most is my 2 grandchildren. They are just a bundle of joy.
Over Christmas time, I went out on a hike in the Grand Tetons with my son. No phones, out in nature, and we literally physically ran into a moose. So while it might have there was a moment of panic, but once we got over that and the moose got off the trail, it was just, it's a moment I'll never forget. The importance of nature is, I think, really important in bringing joy.
And the reassurance of the sense of family, I think, the community and the like. So listen, on that very positive note, I leave you to the rest of the cold day outside. Thank you for your time, attention, your energy, your commitment, your caring. We need it. Keep it, bottle it, blow it out. Thank you so much.